Shalom to all our viewers around the world. Welcome to another edition of Middle East Review coming from Jerusalem, from TV7 Studio. And with me this time is a good friend and a colleague who is an expert on security, strategic issues, and many others, a very well-known publicist, and his name is Amir Oren.
That's all you can say about me after all
This
these
is just
years?
the beginning.
Hi, Danny. How are you?
Hi, good. So at the end of a very, very emotional month here in Israel, we have had the first phase of the ceasefire with Hamas, which came exactly or a day after Trump went into office, quite incidentally or not. And we have had 33 Israelis returning, 25 living, 8 dead ones. The country here was, of course, united in grief and in happiness and with the families. And now we have to look forward and what's coming up next. And we know that just pretty much these days, the first phase of 42 days is over. We have to think of the next phase, and it seems like Israel is not ready to move on to the second phase without getting our hostages back beforehand, leveraging actually the Trump and his administration, who is totally behind Israel. So how do you see the progression from here on this issue?
So here we are. The first week of March is over, not only the short month of February. And in a week's time, we are going to have the Ides of March, always ominous, not necessarily anything major in the way of conflagration, this also being the month of Ramadan, which could be peaceful, but in earlier years, at least twice, was a time of clashes. So let's see. But this is also the 18th month of the war, which started on October the 7th, 2023. And as you said in your introduction, it is time for stocktaking. Now, even though Israel has an overpowering military advantage, it did not yet achieve its declared goals of destroying Hamas altogether, including the uprooting of this Islamist militant and even criminal organization out of its governing functions, which it has held since the summer of 2007. A year earlier, it started what the French called cohabitation with President Mahmoud Abbas, who is still in office 19 years later. But the third war goal was returning the hostages. Now, originally, there were some 250 hostages, some of them foreign nationals, workers from Thailand and others. And as you said, there are still some 59 hostages. Less than a half of them, 24 or so, are alive. The other are bodies of those who were either kidnapped after being murdered on the first day, October the 7th, or having been murdered in captivity or killed during the fighting. So the first phase of the ceasefire is over. Over the last several days, there have been some moves which we will not get into. This is, of course, part of our daily update. But in general, there is a contradiction between the two major goals of getting rid of Hamas and getting back the hostages. And this is because the hostages, especially those who are alive, and now there are only male hostages, all the females have been returned, those who were still alive. There are bodies of female hostages, and many of the remaining hostages are soldiers who were fighting on October the 7th before they were taken hostage, and they are considered prisoners of war because they are not civilians. So Hamas is going to hold onto them as an insurance policy until it gets guarantees, maybe not from Netanyahu, maybe from Trump, that the leaders will not be assassinated as soon as the hostages are back. So they are, again, the sort of human shields which the terror organizations are expert at abducting and holding between themselves and the other side's bullets and bombs. Whether there can be a formula where, for instance, earlier this week, when Netanyahu defended his decision to delay the negotiations over the second phase of the ceasefire, he said that in addition to the agreement, as was published, and not all of the details have been published, there was a so-called Annex B, which was deposited with the cabinet secretariat, and in which most of the details were kept. The only details that have been officially made public were concerning the release of Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails in return for the hostages. So what Netanyahu now disclosed, after the government went to the Supreme Court and fought against the publication of these details only a couple of weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, now he said that there was a side letter, apparently from President Biden, but also initialed by the incoming President Trump, because this was on the eve of the inauguration, saying that Israel would be within its rights if it resumed fighting. Now, apparently, this side letter was secretly shown to people like Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who objected to the agreement in order to placate him and tell him, listen, we have an assurance that even though we signed an agreement, we can really revoke our signature. So here is where the problem lies. Netanyahu and Trump through his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, must find a way to get out of the first agreement without Hamas saying, if that's the case, no deal, let your hostages rot in our tunnels.
Indeed. And I guess this is what maybe Witkoff meant by trying to square the circle, because what you have mentioned, Amir, correctly so, is really a direct contradiction, of course, between Israel's position and, of course, its goals and Hamas. It seems like it's a zero-sum game. And, side letters have always been known in history as...
On whose side are these letters?
Yes. So I always say side letters are not constructive ambiguity. They are contradiction ambiguity. When you say to one, you give a letter to side A.
Destructive.
Exactly. And the opposite, you give letter
to
side B.
You know what you remind me of? On September the 1st, 1975, the second separation of forces, disengagement agreement between Israel and Egypt took place when President Ford was in charge, along with Secretary of State Kissinger. Now, one of Prime Minister Rabin's major concerns at the time was that this would be the model for a second disengagement agreement with Syria. The first one has been signed a year or so earlier. So there was a side letter because Egypt was not a party to what was going to happen between Israel and Syria. And in this side letter, Ford told Rabin that he, the US president, will take or will consider it or have a great weight to Israel's position. It did not commit him to approve whatever position Rabin or a future prime minister came up with, but it was enough for Rabin to tell his critics who were concerned regarding the Syrian problem, because on the Golan Heights, the size does not permit another such agreement.
Right. And meanwhile, the Golan Heights is getting, the Israeli Golan Heights is getting bigger and bigger towards the Damascus. But yes, we cannot complain about it. It is the art of diplomacy, basically.
But that's a very important issue which you are raising now regarding the Syrian-Israeli emerging security relationship.
Absolutely, and this was actually my next point. We have discussed Gaza, and of course, this is the highest on our agenda because we want our people back. But if a year ago or so, or certainly the 7th of October, the thinking was the uniting all the theaters or all the fronts against us. Now it seems to be pretty much broken up. Ceasefire with Hezbollah, with no relations to Hamas. Syria is actually folding, basically. The Houthis are still trying, to stay relevant, and they mentioned that if the fighting resumes in Gaza, they will attack Israel again, and not only Israel, but also American troops or American assets.
Let them try.
Let them try. What do you think would be, let's say, the consequence of such a new engagement by the Houthis?
It would not be a major one. We have seen over the last 17 months, because they started fighting Israel, shooting at Israel some 10 days after the massacre and after Hezbollah joined the fight. So let's put the Houthis in reserve as they have committed to. And as long as there is this ceasefire with Hamas in Gaza, they have no cause. Of course, they can still threaten shipping in Bab el-Mandeb and other international waterways. But going back to what you said a moment before you went south to Yemen, a year or so ago, or actually on October the 7th itself, the Israeli concern was that the northern front would be even more important than the southern one, because in the south, Israel was already, it is difficult to admit, but this was the fact, Israel was defeated. Of course, Israel then recovered, went on the attack, and destroyed many of the Hamas assets, along with civilian infrastructure. We don't have to go into the entire story. But at that time, Israel feared that what happened in the south was only the prelude to what could happen in the north from Hezbollah, thousands upon thousands of missiles, from Syria, where there were hostile militias, pro-Iranian militias, as well as from Iran itself. Now, this concern is moot now for several reasons. Hezbollah was given a very destructive blow. It is not over yet. It could resume fighting, but apparently they have learned their lesson for now. Their patron, Iran, was also struck by Israel in retaliation for 2 offensives. And in Syria, which was the bridge between Iran and Lebanon, the land bridge. The Iranians moved munitions to Hezbollah via Iraq and then from Iraq to Syria, Iraq being a neighbor of Syria, and from Syria transshipping it to Lebanon in order for Hezbollah to be equipped by it. There was another route a bit south of there through Jordan to the Palestinians in the West Bank. But the Syria land bridge was destroyed by the collapse of the Assad regime. The problem is that Israel may be facing a new rival, adversary, let's not say enemy yet, Turkey, being the power behind the throne in Damascus. Turkey now apparently on the verge of a truce with the Kurdish organization PKK, and therefore the Turks who are close to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, close to Hamas, and perhaps trying to form a new axis with these forces in Syria. So imagine what happens if the Hamas leaders accept the idea, which up to now they rejected, to be exiled to either Qatar, another member of this axis, or to Turkey. Now they will be able to relocate to Syria and try to reestablish their base. Now, Israel can hit them there, but if they are under Turkish protection, it will be much more difficult. So this is a new security concern for Israel. We had some 2 months of joy over the collapse of the Assad regime and the way that the Israeli Air Force managed to destroy most of the Syrian military assets, but it may reemerge in a new form as quite a concern for Israel.
Yes, and on Syria, I mean, let's concentrate on Syria. We'll go back south and then maybe to Gaza to close the entire circle. But in Syria, you're right. I think Israel's concern mainly is to confront Turkish fronts and Turkish influence all over Syria with everything that it may contain. And right now, it seems like Israel would prefer to keep the Russians in Syria in order to tame the Turkish. Do you think this is feasible? What we understand here that Julani, Mr. Ashara, the de facto ruler of Syria, has offered the Russians to actually absolve or write off $23 billion of debt from Syria to Russia, and probably in return to keep the Russian bases, whether it's Hamamayim, the air base, maybe it's also Latakia and Tartus, the naval ones. I think it would be better given what we see, the experience we have had in the last few years, it seems like it is better for Israel to have the Russians with the coordination with Russia and on deconflicting and all that. And maybe this is better for Israel than the Turks. On the other hand, the Turks are making inroads by actually trying to neutralize the Kurdish issue, the PKK, with Öcalan in jail, declaring that the war between the Kurds and the Turks are over. I'm not sure that this will be the case because we have been seeing before ceasefires which were broken, and I'm not sure that the younger generation of the Turks, PKK, would listen to the 75-year-old Öcalan in jail, who's compromised actually, where he's there when he makes all his peaceful gestures.
So let's unpack it from the global to the regional to the local. Globally, we used to think that there is a sort of a zero-sum game between the United States and Russia. And in Syria, both of them fought ISIS, Daesh. There was a division of labor along geographical lines. The Euphrates Valley was supposed to be the dividing line. between them, the Russians to the west of it, the Americans to the east. This, all the while, the Assad regime was fighting the opposition. In the opposition, the Kurds helped the Americans. They were the mainstay of the opposition. The Turks did not want the Kurds to succeed too much, even though the Turks were against Assad. And earlier, in the 2014-2015 timeframe, there was a confrontation between the Turks and the Russians, with a plane being intercepted, an ambassador being assassinated, both of them, Turkey and Russia, intervening in Syria. And this is the picture as we saw it until some 3 months ago, 4 months ago. Now, the picture is totally different. We won't get into the American-Russian relationship between Trump and Putin, but obviously they are cooperating. The relationship is not adversarial. So it is not as if Russia leaving Syria is supposed to be a plus for the United States, the way in the early 70s, Kissinger wished Sadat would kick the Russians out of Egypt, which was done without the US giving Egypt anything in return. It was quite a surprise. Now, what is the Israeli interest? Going back to our earlier comments, Israel does not want Julani to be one of the parts in an axis which will inevitably be against Israel. A jihadi, Muslim Brotherhood, Turkey, Qatar, and Allah forbid, should there be a regime upheaval in Cairo, Egypt could also revert to a warlike stance against Israel as part of this axis. So for Israel, it is better for the government in Syria not to be so strong, not to be so central, and not to have its rule over the southern districts, south of Damascus. Damascus is only an hour's ride from the Israeli border, especially if what you are riding is a tank rather than a sedan. But the districts of Quneitra, Dara, and Sueda also, and Dara also close to the Jordanian border, which is also important, very important to Israel. Mm-hmm. These are all part of Israel's security interest. And in Sueda, it so happens that there is a concentration of the Druze community, with which Israel has a special relationship, partly because the Israeli Druze community is so important. So to sum it all up, Israel is now trying to rearrange the deck in Syria. Of course, Julani may think that for him it is not so good to be wholly dependent on Turkey. He would also like to diversify the powers that he is relying on, including in Europe, and going back into the Arab fold, where Turkey is not necessarily the favorite. So we will probably have to analyze it either here. Here, usually, you are facing Dr. Eran Lerman, who happens to be away right this moment, but he will be back. And surely you will have a lot to cut your teeth into.
Absolutely. And Syria, you mentioned the Druze, which is also a main factor, certainly for Israel. And it seems to me that now the option is, if I say dichotomically, of course, there are many, many sub-options, is that either Syria will be glued together again under Julani or anyone else, which may have, its pros and cons, or maybe it will be left as bits and parts, a Druze influence with Israel, a Kurdish with Turkey, a Russian, and of course we have the Iraqis, militias, Iran. It could be quite interesting to watch how it unfolds. But just before we conclude, let's go back to South. We mentioned the Houthis. Saudis, of course, in that case, are with Israel in terms of its interest. They also would like to see moving together and isolating Iran. And the question is, how will the negotiation between Hamas and Israel could affect involvement of the Saudis by pushing on Qatar or others to bring the Hamas closer to the Israeli stance?
Well, Danny, the Saudis have been the silent partner in many inter-Arab moves against Israel, as well as, in a way, for Israel or with Israel. Before the 1973 war, it was King Faisal whose pledge of support to Sadat and Assad convinced them that they could embark on this adventure. And this had to do with the oil embargo and the oil price hike. The Saudis are traditionally concerned with Jerusalem. They also are concerned with the Palestinian question, which is not one and the same. The Saudis would like to have a major influence over Al-Aqsa.
As custodians, and then they have the rival of the Hashemites in Jordan, all in Morocco, all of them wants to be custodians.
That's true. So they would like to play a major part in the negotiation.
Yes. So as we said, we're just finishing a full circle, and it seems like everything right now depends on Gaza, because this is the key to moving forward, whether quiet and ceasefire prolonged in Gaza, and of course what would be the future of Gaza, and certainly what would be the vision, the American vision for the Middle East.
Or the key to the gates of hell.
Or the key to the gates of hell, or hopefully heaven, a Riviera in Gaza,
Definitely.
and the Syria-Israeli normalization. Thank you, Amir. Thank you to all our viewers for watching another episode of Middle East Review coming out of Jerusalem, TV7. Thank you very much.